All right, so we're diving deep today into James 2:14 to 26.
Faith in action.
Exactly, faith in action. And, we're not going to waste your time uh, rehashing the basics here.
Right.
You already know this passage.
Favorite hasters.
Your Bible study leaders, this is like familiar territory.
Tips and bread and butter, yeah.
Exactly. But what we wanted to do is kind of go a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've analyzed a bunch of different sermons on this passage
Yeah.
to kind of pull out like the nuggets,
The golden nuggets.
the golden nuggets, the things that maybe you haven't thought of before, the sort of unique perspectives, and even, some cool sermon illustrations.
Yeah, we found some great things.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in. One of the things that really caught my eye, I think it was the Hoshton Baptist Church sermon.
Okay.
They pointed out that the Greek word for faith in verse 14 is a little unusual.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's apparently a non-masculine form.
Huh. So what does that tell us?
Well, they were suggesting that James might be talking about a different type of faith than what we typically think of as saving faith.
Interesting. So not just like belief in God, but something more.
Right. It seems to be more about like a faith that's purely intellectual.
Okay.
You just agree with the idea of God, but
But it doesn't affect how you live.
exactly. It doesn't change your behavior at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's almost like saying, yeah, God exists, but, not living any differently because of it.
Right. Right. Like acknowledging God, but not really surrendering to him.
Exactly. And this kind of connects to a point that was made in the River Ridge Church sermon,
Okay.
where they contrasted James's view of faith with Paul's.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, they were highlighting how Paul's emphasis is more on trusting in God's faithfulness.
Right, like resting in God's grace.
Right, while James is more focused on how that trust should play out
How it should manifest.
in our actions. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just about what we believe in our heads. I think it's about how that belief transforms our lives.
Exactly. And, speaking of action and how this all plays out, the Live Oak Church sermon used this analogy that I thought was so good.
Oh, I love a good analogy. Lay it on me.
They said that faith without works is like having a pilot's license, but never actually flying a plane.
Okay, yeah, I see where they're going with that.
Right. You can have all the knowledge, all the theoretical understanding,
You passed the test. You know the rules.
but if you never actually get in the cockpit,
You're not really a pilot.
you're not a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a powerful image, especially, for a sermon.
Oh, absolutely. It takes something abstract like faith and makes it concrete.
Right. And relatable. People can really grasp that.
It helps people connect the dots.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're not really living out your calling as a pilot if you're never actually flying.
And in the same way, you're not really living out your faith if it doesn't affect your actions.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about repentance.
Okay, good topic.
The Calvary Baptist Church sermon went really deep on this.
Okay.
They were highlighting the Greek word metanoia,
Which, of course, means,
a change of mind and heart.
right, not just behavior modification.
Exactly. So it's not just about, doing the right things outwardly.
It's about a genuine transformation on the inside.
Mm-hmm. It's about a shift in how we view ourselves, how we view God, how we view sin.
It's about getting to the root of the issue.
Yeah, and that internal change is what then leads to the outward action.
Exactly. It's the fruit of true repentance.
So now I want to get into some sermon illustrations.
Oh, yeah. We found some good ones, didn't we?
Yeah, some really creative stuff. The X-Church, for example, compared faith to a baseball glove.
A baseball glove. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Right. It's like a glove is only useful when there's a hand in it.
Ready to catch the ball.
Exactly. And just like that, faith is only complete when it's paired with action.
I like that. It's the hand in the glove that makes it functional.
Right. So it's not enough to just have the glove. Just like it's not enough to just have faith.
You got to put it to use.
You got to put it into action.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, actually effective.
Yeah, that's a great visual.
And then we have the Kingscliff Church. They took a completely different approach.
Okay, I'm curious.
They compared faith to a movie trailer.
A movie trailer. That's interesting.
Right. It's like faith, it gives us a glimpse of God's kingdom.
A sneak peek of what's to come.
Exactly. Like
Or-
we get to see the preview, but then we're called to live out that trailer.
To show the world what God's kingdom is like through our actions.
Yes. And I love that because it makes us think about, what scenes are we showing?
Right. What aspects of God's kingdom are we reflecting in our lives?
Exactly. It flips the script a little bit. Instead of just thinking about what we believe.
It makes us consider how we're demonstrating that belief.
To the
Yeah.
world around us. Now, both the Access Church and the Kingscliff Church also talked about this idea of like different types of faith.
Oh, yeah. Like dead faith, deceptive faith, dynamic faith.
Right. It's almost like, where does our faith fall on that spectrum?
Exactly.
Is it stagnant and lifeless?
Just going through the motions.
Or is it vibrant and active and constantly moving and growing?
Yeah, that's a great framework for pastors to use.
I think so too.
It challenges people to really examine their faith.
And now for a little historical tidbit here, did you know that Martin Luther initially called James a straw epistle?
Oh, yeah. Compared to Paul's writings.
Yeah, we saw that mentioned in both the River Ridge Church and the Eagles View Church sermons.
And it's understandable why he might have said that.
Right.
Because Luther was really battling against this idea that we could earn our salvation through good deeds.
So he saw James as maybe undermining that message.
In a way, yes. But it's important to remember that James was writing to a different audience.
With different issues.
Exactly. He was addressing a different problem.
So it's all about understanding the context.
Yeah. Right. And seeing how these different authors, while seemingly contradictory, can actually complement each other.
Exactly. And you know, to kind of wrap up this first section, the CBC Marietta sermon really hit home this point, that as pastors, we need to understand and address this tension between professing faith and living it out.
Yeah, it's not enough to just talk the talk.
Right. We got to walk the walk.
We have to embody our faith in our actions.
And help others to do the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, where it gets real.
That's where the power of faith becomes tangible.
Yeah, transformative.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about closing that gap, you know, between what we say we believe and how we actually live.
And helping our congregations to see that too. You know, it's not just a Sunday morning thing.
Right. Faith should permeate every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. It should impact how we interact with our families, how we do our jobs.
Yeah.
You know, everything.
It's a way of life.
Now, this reminds me of something the Eagles View Church sermon touched on, about the Greek word teleios.
Teleios, meaning?
Mature or complete.
Right, right. And how do they connect that to James?
Well, they were talking about faith being perfected through works.
Oh, okay. So it's not that our works earn us salvation, but...
But they're like the natural outflow of a mature faith.
Like the fruit of a tree?
Yeah, exactly. They use that analogy,
Yeah.
you know. Like when a fruit tree is healthy and flourishing, it naturally produces fruit.
Right. The fruit is evidence of its health.
And in the same way, our good works are like the fruits of our faith.
The visible signs of that inward transformation.
It's a good image. I think it's especially helpful for people who, you know, wrestle with that whole faith versus works debate.
Yeah, it shows that it's not an either proposition.
True faith naturally leads to good works.
It's how God designed it. We're created to be doers of the word, not just hearers.
Doers of the word. Now, the Eagles View Church also pointed out something about James's writing style that I thought was interesting.
Oh, what's that?
They noted how often he uses rhetorical questions.
Okay, so questions where the answer is kind of already implied.
Yeah, exactly. Like when he asks, can faith save him? He's not really expecting a yes or no answer, is he?
No, he's making a point. He's emphasizing that faith without works is dead.
Right. It's a powerful technique.
Yeah.
You know, it forces the reader to confront the truth.
It really drives home the point.
And it shows how serious James was about this whole issue of faith and works. Like, he saw it as central to the Christian life, not just some optional add-on.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we need to emphasize today, especially in a culture that often prioritizes feelings and intentions over actions.
Right. It's all about, like, being authentic, following your heart. But, you know, James is calling us to something deeper.
He's saying, show me your faith, don't just tell me about it.
And that's where those sermon illustrations can be so powerful. You know, they give us concrete ways to connect those dots for our congregations.
They take those abstract concepts and make them real and relatable, make them memorable even.
Like the baseball glove analogy. I bet people will remember that one.
Or the movie trailer. It sparks the imagination.
It's about engaging with the message,
Yeah.
not just passively consuming information.
And I think that's what these pastors have done so effectively in their sermons. They've made James 2:14-26 come alive.
They really have. They've gone beyond the surface level, beyond the Sunday school answers,
They've wrestled with the tough questions, the tensions, the nuances.
and come up with some real gems.
Insights that can help us all grow in our understanding of faith.
That's what makes this kind of deep dive so valuable. It's not just about getting more information.
It's about gaining wisdom.
It's about seeing this familiar passage with fresh eyes and then, taking those insights back to our own teaching.
Exactly, weaving them into our conversations about faith. Now, the Access Church sermon talked about different types of faith, remember? And one they mentioned was dynamic faith. What does that mean to you?
Dynamic faith. Well, for me, it's a faith that's alive and active. It's constantly growing and evolving. It's not static.
It's always pushing forward.
Yeah. Seeking to know God more deeply and to live out His will.
It's like a fire constantly being stoked.
And fueled by our relationship with God, by our time spent in prayer, in His Word. And I think it's also fueled by our willingness to take risks.
To step out in faith even when it feels scary or uncomfortable.
Because that's where real growth happens, outside of our comfort zones.
That's where we see God move.
Now, the Access Church also talked about the importance of living out our faith through action. And they used a really cool analogy of a child jumping into a swimming pool.
Oh, yeah, like taking a leap of faith.
Right. You got to trust that the water's going to be there to catch you.
And you just got to go for it.
And that's what it's like with God. You know, we have to trust that He's going to be there for us even when we're stepping out into the unknown.
Even when we don't have all the answers.
And that trust empowers us to act.
To do things that might seem impossible on our own.
Because we know we're not doing them on our own strength. We have God's power working in us and through us.
And that reminds me of something the Grace Fisher's sermon highlighted. They talked about how true faith is holistic.
It should impact every area of our lives.
Exactly. It's not just about Sundays or our personal quiet time. It's about how we live every single moment.
It affects our relationships, our work, our finances, even how we spend our leisure time.
Everything. Because our faith isn't just a set of beliefs, it's a way of life.
They also used a really powerful analogy, comparing faith without works to a broken appliance.
A broken appliance, right? Like it's no longer useful.
Exactly. If it's not serving its purpose, it's like a lamp that's not plugged in. It has the potential to give light, but
it's not fulfilling its purpose.
So we need to make sure our faith is connected to the source of power, connected to God Himself.
And that connection will empower us to live lives that are truly useful, lives that bring glory to God and make a difference in the world. Which brings us back to the challenge that James presents in this passage.
The challenge to live out our faith in tangible, practical ways.
To be doers of the word, not just hearers.
To let our actions be the evidence of our faith.
It's a challenge that's not always easy, but it's worth embracing. Because when we do, we experience the fullness of the Christian life. We see God's power at work in our lives and in the world around us. And that's an incredible thing. Speaking of incredible things, I was really intrigued by the Hamilton Baptist Church sermon.
Oh, yeah? What did you find interesting about their approach?
Well, they offered a unique perspective on James 2:14-26 by focusing on the different ways that James and Paul use the word justification.
Okay.
How so? They suggested that James might be using justification more in the sense of vindication or proof.
Oh, interesting.
Like, how our actions demonstrate the genuineness of our faith.
We're providing evidence to support our claim.
Exactly. They use this great illustration of the Houston Astros winning the World Series.
Okay. I'm curious to see how they tie that into faith and works.
Well, they said it's like when a team wins a championship, it vindicates all the hard work and preparation that led up to that victory.
I see. So it's not that the victory itself earned them the right to be called champions, but rather
the victory was the natural outcome of all the effort they put in.
So in the same way, our good works are not what earn us salvation. They're the natural outflow of our faith, the evidence that our faith is real and alive.
Exactly. And I think that's a really helpful distinction for people who struggle with the idea of works somehow negating grace. It shows that it's not about earning our way to heaven,
but about living out the reality of our salvation.
Right. And the Hamilton Baptist Church also talked about the importance of understanding the Jewish context of James's audience.
Oh, right. They brought up the Shema.
The central prayer of Judaism that affirms the oneness of God.
And they pointed out that James's audience would have been very familiar with the Shema and its emphasis on action.
It's a great point. The Shema doesn't just say believe in God.
It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might."
It's a call to action.
To love God with everything we are. And that call to action is echoed throughout James's letter, isn't it? He's constantly urging his readers to live out their beliefs in concrete ways.
I think that's something we can all learn from. regardless of our religious background. This idea that true faith isn't passive, it's active and engaged.
Hmm. Now, the Kingscliff Church sermon took a really interesting approach to James 2:14-26 by talking about the difference between dead faith, deceptive faith, and dynamic faith.
Right.
I thought that was such a helpful framework for understanding the different ways faith can manifest itself in our lives. It's a challenge to examine our own faith and ask ourselves, what kind of faith do I have?
Is it dormant? Is it lifeless? Ineffective?
Or is it vibrant and active and constantly growing?
And the Kingscliff Church also used that powerful analogy of a movie trailer to describe faith, remember?
Oh, yeah. I loved that one. It's such a great visual. They said faith is like getting a glimpse of the full reality of God's kingdom, a sneak peek of what's to come. And it should excite us.
It should motivate us to live in a way that reflects that kingdom.
Exactly. And they also talk about the importance of action, even referencing Dietrich Bonhoeffer's concept of costly grace.
Right, the idea that true faith will cost us something.
It will require sacrifice and obedience and a willingness to go against the grain, because following Jesus isn't always easy or popular.
But it's always worth it.
And that's a message that needs to be heard, loud and clear. We need to be willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's difficult.
And to let our actions speak louder than our words. It's interesting how so many of these sermons focus on the idea of action being the proof of genuine faith.
It is a central theme in James.
And I think it resonates with us because deep down, we know it's true. Our actions reveal what we truly believe.
Mm-hmm. Now, the One Church NJ sermon really honed in on the necessity of faith being alive and expressed through actions.
Yeah, they were saying that claiming to have faith without any corresponding actions is just absurd.
It's like saying you're a professional basketball player, but you've never even picked up a basketball.
Or claiming to be a chef, but you've never cooked a meal. It just doesn't make sense.
Our actions should align with our words, especially when it comes to faith, because faith is more than just a mental assent to a set of beliefs.
Right. It's a way of life. It should be evident in everything we do.
And they also emphasize the importance of trusting in God's provision, taking those bold steps of faith.
And they use the examples of Abraham and Rahab, two people in the Bible who demonstrated incredible faith through their actions.
Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac because he trusted that God would provide.
And Rahab hid the Israelite spies because she believed God was on their side.
These are powerful examples of what it means to live out our faith in practical ways.
They remind us that God can do amazing things through ordinary people who are willing to trust him.
And I think that message is so important for our congregations to hear, especially in the face of all the challenges and uncertainties we face today.
It's a reminder that we're not alone. God is with us. He will provide for us, and he will empower us to do great things for his kingdom. Now, the CBC Marietta sermon tackled the tension between professing faith and living it out.
Which is something we all wrestle with. It's easy to say we believe something, but it's much harder to actually live it out.
Right, consistently. They actually used a great analogy, like imagining a spectrum of Christians.
Oh, interesting. Like from one end to the other.
Yeah, from those whose faith is basically indistinguishable from non-believers to those who are overly strict and legalistic.
Okay.
And they emphasize that saving faith is not just a profession, but it's demonstrated through actions that align with the heart of Christ.
So it's about having a faith that makes a difference, a faith that's visible and tangible.
They also referenced Martin Luther's struggle with the book of James, remember?
Oh, yeah. How he initially criticized it as an epistle of straw.
Right, exactly. It's interesting how his strong emphasis on salvation by faith alone initially made him wary of James's focus on works.
But over time, he came to appreciate the importance of both,
And I think that's a valuable lesson for us as well. We need to be careful not to pit faith and works against each other.
Because they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they?
Absolutely. True faith will always produce good works, and good works are the evidence of true faith.
It's a beautiful synergy.
Right.
And it should be evident in the lives of all who claim to follow Christ.
Now, the CBC Marietta sermon also talked about the importance of understanding God's character and holiness in relation to faith and works.
Right, and they brought up R.C. Sproul's book, The Holiness of God, and his emphasis on the fact that God's holiness demands perfection.
And because we're incapable of perfection on our own, we need Christ's righteousness to cover us.
And that righteousness is received by faith.
But it's also evidenced by our actions, because a transformed heart will naturally produce a transformed life.
And that transformation should be visible to the world, right? People should be able to see it in us, in the way we live.
It's about reflecting the character of Christ in everything we do. So as we wrap up this deep dive into these sermons on James 2:14 to 26, what are some key takeaways that we can apply to our own lives and ministries?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is this: the importance of bridging that gap between belief and action.
James is calling us to a faith that's more than just intellectual assent.
It's more than just an emotional sentiment.
It's a faith that's lived out in concrete, tangible ways. And that means being intentional about putting our faith into practice every single day.
In everything we do, in our relationships, our work, our communities.
Another key takeaway is the power of those sermon illustrations. We've seen some really creative and effective ways to communicate this message, using analogies, stories, real-life examples.
And I think it's crucial for us as pastors and teachers to find ways to make these truths come alive.
To help people see how these ancient words are still relevant to their lives today.
We need to make those connections for them.
And finally, I think it's important to remember that we're all on a journey. None of us has arrived.
We're all still growing and learning.
Striving to become more like Christ.
And the important thing is that we're moving in the right direction.
That we're allowing God's grace to work in and through us.
So let's encourage each other to live out our faith in bold and courageous ways. To be the hands and feet of Jesus.
In a world that desperately needs his love and compassion.
And that's what this deep dive has been all about, hasn't it?
It has. Exploring the depths of James 2:14 to 26 and discovering its timeless relevance.
Now it's up to us to take these insights and put them into practice.
To be the change we want to see.
And let our actions be the evidence of our faith.
You know, before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to that movie trailer analogy.
Oh, yeah. From the Kingscliff Church sermon.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me.
Me too. It's so visual, right?
It is. It really gets you thinking.
Yeah. If our lives are like trailers for God's kingdom, what scenes are we showing?
That's a good question.
What are people seeing when they look at us? Are we showing scenes of hope and healing?
Of grace and compassion and second chances.
Yeah. Are we showing what it really means to follow Jesus?
Or are we showing something else?
Something that doesn't quite line up with what we say we believe.
Right. Because, actions speak louder than words.
They really do. So we need to be mindful of the scenes we're creating.
In our own lives and as part of the church.
We need to make sure we're showing the world what God's kingdom is really all about.
The love, the joy, the peace.
The transformation.
Yeah. It's a challenge, for sure.
But it's a challenge worth embracing.
Because when we live out our faith in action,
we become living, breathing trailers for God's kingdom.
And that's a powerful witness to the world.
Well said. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into James 2:14 to 26. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've gained some new insights and maybe even some inspiration for your next sermon or Bible study.
Remember, faith without works is dead, but faith in action can change the world.
So go out there and be the change you want to see.
And let your light shine.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep living out your faith.